Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Alicia Espinosa.
Thank you so much, Dominique. So I'd like to start by talking about what is a NIC. I'd like to, we will be referring throughout the session a NIC, we call it a NIC, a Networked Improvement Community for short. They're a relatively new type of, sorry about that, I just realized that I was not on video. Okay, so going back to defining a NIC, it's a relatively new type of collaborative research partnership between researchers and educators, I would say within the last decade. And really it's about working together towards developing and testing interventions to address common problems of practice. They've become increasingly popularized by the Carnegie Foundation for Advancements of Teaching, and really a lot of funders such as the Gates Foundation, Nellie Mae Foundation have invested a significant amount of funds towards NICs. NICs can be educators working in a range of capacities at different levels of the education system, whether it be school level, district level, or state level. So why form a NIC, and what are the distinguishing features or what really makes the NIC model appealing? It is a promising approach that educators can use to tackle a range of education issues into solutions within the local context. It empowers practitioners to take active roles in research and improvement. It's also designed to affect change across schools and systems, not just individual classrooms. It addresses immediate needs and priorities, and as we all have experienced, this is even more relevant at this moment in time due to the education inequities that have been exacerbated by the learning disruptions over the last 2 years. So whether it's SEL, whether it's attendance, discipline, or family engagement, for example, this model can be used to test strategies for addressing problems or issues as they arise in real time. Another unique advantage is that it allows for small-scale testing to inform large-scale implementation. It also supports other improvement efforts by shedding light on contextual factors that might impact program implementation across the system. Finally, NICs are designed to carry out rapid cycles of continuous improvement in real time, meaning that changes and adjustments are made along the way to increase the likelihood of achieving the intended outcomes. As described by Anthony Bright, one of America's most noted educational researchers in continuous improvement, rather than asking whether an intervention works, a network improvement community asks what works, when, for whom, and under what particular circumstances. So today I'll be covering the 4 essential features of the NIC model, and as Dominique mentioned earlier, you will have the opportunity to learn a little bit about how these all are operationalized in the NIC that we will be sharing during the panel discussion. Again, the first feature is that it is focused on a common aim. Developing an aim statement is a collective effort. It should represent individuals at all levels of the network, including practitioners, researchers, decision makers. The aim articulates the commitment that all network members agree to collectively work towards. It also serves as an overarching goal for an improvement effort that answers the key question, what are we here to accomplish? They should clearly specify for whom, how much, and by when. And it should be aspirational, but it also should be achievable. Therefore, the measures that are determined by the team are essential to keeping track as to whether those outcomes are in fact achievable and what progress is being made towards them. I've had the privilege and opportunity to be part of 3 distinct NICs over the last 5 years. I'd like to share some examples of the aims that we arrived at. The first is a NIC focused on math achievement for high school students. And as you can see, the focus is on increasing proficiency, right, for students in mathematics in both Algebra 1 and geometry. The second is focused on ELA achievement for middle school students. And the third is focused on a multidisciplinary student-centered formative assessment specifically for high school students. So as you can see from the 3 aims, while they're all distinct in nature, meaning that they focus on different content areas, whether it be math or ELA or on general student formative assessment, and with it a variation, as you can see, across grade levels and variation across, again, content areas. They all equally articulate what the NIC is set out to accomplish. So throughout this session, you'll hear the term change idea quite a bit. And a change idea is an alteration to a system or process. It is tested to provide insight as to whether the intervention or change is truly impacting the identified driver for change. So I'll take a step back and talk a little bit about what is meant by a driver in reference to a networked improvement community and what we mean by working theory of improvement. So what you will see is a driver diagram, which is essentially a visual representation of a group's working theory of improvement. It establishes a common language among the diverse set of problem solvers. I'd like to share a driver diagram from the network focused on math as an example. So what I'd like to do is show you the aim statement, and this should seem familiar from the previous slide. Then I'd like to show you the primary driver. Now, the primary drivers represent an improvement community's hypothesis about the main area of influence necessary to advance the aim. Now, as you can see in this case, math instruction that provides opportunity for all students to access and engage with rigorous content is the primary driver. The secondary drivers reflect the structures or processes necessary to actualize the primary driver. So in this case, in order to ensure access with rigorous and engaging content, we're really looking to ensure that student tasks and examples balance fluency and understanding, and that students are solving, communicating, arguing, and evaluating. Then what follows are the change ideas. And as mentioned earlier, the idea is that these change ideas are alterations to existing practice. So in this specific case, we might decide that a change idea is really determining the type of question that offers opportunities for just-in-time review, as well as launching into content to introduce the lesson. So we're doing a lot of review and thinking about what those tasks look like. We may have a problem-solving template with prompts to facilitate the solving process to provide students a guide and, again, some scaffolds around that, and a discussion protocol in which pairs of students take turns sharing, justifying their work to help build those skills around communicating, arguing, and evaluating. The next feature is that the work is really grounded in a deep understanding of the problem. We must engage a diverse set of practitioners and researchers, as mentioned earlier, that together identify and articulate the problem. It's also essential to conduct a root cause analysis because it ensures that selected change ideas, whatever those interventions or practices are, that they're appropriately aligned to the identified root cause and that they're supported by evidence. Tools such as the fishbone diagram illustrated in this slide are helpful to unpeel the layers of the problem. This will also lead to long-term change as opposed to treating the symptoms of, let's say, a problem. In other words, we're not seeking a short-term Band-Aid improvement efforts, but really trying to dig deep in trying to understand the underlying causes of the problem. In doing so, we will identify other data sources that either confirm or further inform the problem that we have identified. So the third is that NICs are really grounded by applying improvement science methods. They are disciplined and they test and refine interventions, in this case using what we call the plan, do, study, act cycle. So as you can see, the plan, for example, when planning, the team of networked improvement doers, those that are doing the work, propose a change in how to test it. They then select their measures and they develop a data collection plan to make sure that they're tracking the progress that they're making and the impact of that particular change idea. Next is the do. So this is where the implementers go off and they test the change idea. They collect data and they reflect on what happened. We then go into the study piece, and that's where we really look to analyze and capture any information that we learned to help inform the improvements. Lastly, we act, which is based on the data collected, we decide on whether to adapt, adopt, or abandon the change idea. So it's a fast and it's an iterative cycle in which we're constantly refining as we move along. So let me give you a concrete example, going back to the previous math NIC that I mentioned earlier. So as you might recall, we talked about an aim, we talked about a primary driver, and the secondary driver. In this case, an example of one was solving, communicating, and arguing and evaluating. So if we look at an example plan, what you'll notice is that the team came together and decided what type of change idea or instructional routine will we put together to support students in solving, evaluating, and arguing. So in this case, teachers got together and thought about a particular question that would stimulate thinking, the types of instructions to give students to individually process the task at hand, and then agree on collaborative structures and discussion prompts, both in small groups, but also in the larger whole group discussions, and then determining the most effective system to really monitor the quality, but also the depth of conversations that students are having. So teachers will then go ahead and they will implement the change idea. They'll look and measure the percentage of students engaged in the small group discussions, both the number of students engaged, but also the quality of the discussions that they're engaging in, measure the percentage of students engaged in the whole group discussion, survey students regarding the learning experience, engage in individual teacher reflection, and then document any surprises or challenges that arise along the way. Next, the team would come together and they would debrief, share their data, review their individual classroom data, and capture any challenges or barriers that surfaced that is context specific, meaning the students that they specifically tested the change idea with. They look at effective approaches, what worked for you, what didn't work for others, and how do you learn from each other on the spot, right? And then come together to propose possible refinements to the implementation of the agreed upon change idea. Then we move into the act. And as I mentioned earlier, this is where the team will decide and reach consensus on, do we adapt the current idea because it shows promise? It worked in some contexts and maybe not others, but can we make adaptations so that it increases its effectiveness on most students? Or do we abandon this change idea? Do we determine that it's not really pushing on that driver that is necessary to achieve the network aim? Or should we adopt it, meaning that it's shown evidence of success and it's ready to take to scale? So the last feature of a networked improvement community, and really one of the most exciting pieces, is that it's organized to replicate change ideas across various contexts and disseminate effective practices. And this is done in a variety of different ways and at different periods of time, meaning that there are some more immediate dissemination of practices and some that are a little bit more long-term. The most immediate, of course, are the team debriefs, where classroom teachers share what worked, what did not work, and under what conditions. We also, NICs typically are a part of network convenings where all the NIC participants come together to share across classrooms, schools, districts, or states. And again, this depends on the makeup of the NIC and who's involved. There are also opportunities for publications. Oftentimes the practitioners and the researchers collaborate on broader dissemination to the field. And then there are conferences that NIC participants collaborate on, presentations to share tools, resources, and processes with other NICs across the country. Essentially, these conferences, Carnegie hosts a yearly conference where NICs from across the country come together. And again, they share tools, they problem solve together, they share exciting, promising evidence for models or change ideas that they've come up with. And I do see that the questions coming in, and I promise I will make sure that I have a couple minutes at the end so that I can address some of the questions that are coming in the chat, all very, very good questions. So the Partners for Network Improvement at the University of Pittsburgh have worked with numerous NICs across the country and often serve as developmental evaluators for funders such as Gates and the Nellie Mae Foundation. And here are some benefits that teachers have consistently reported in either interviews or surveys. Teachers are saying that peer collaboration and problem solving are powerful forms of professional development. The disciplined approach of the plan, do, study, act cycles provides accountability and supports long-term instructional change. The network design tends to break down disciplinary silos, allowing teachers to benefit from a broader array of colleagues. And this iterative use of data increases teacher confidence and ability to use data to inform instruction. And lastly, quick wins mean seeing those immediate changes in student learning increase teachers' confidence in the use and application of continuous improvement. Lastly, I will say that some implementation tips based on conversation with continuous improvement experts and feedback provided by NIC participants during debrief conversations in other NICs in Michigan and Minnesota are the following. Build a team with a diverse set of expertise, clarify those roles and commitments, establish buy-in by aligning work with ongoing efforts. We all know how difficult and how taxed educators are at all levels of the system. How do you create alignment and ensure this doesn't feel like something else that you're doing, but something that's really effective and efficient across various efforts in your school or district? And use improvement science tools resource to identify actionable problems. And this comes back to identify the problem, really looking at the root causes and addressing those root causes rather than the symptoms. We want to make sure that teachers feel like they're capable of moving the lever on those key problems that they've identified. And lastly, increase capacity to apply continuous improvement research to address problems of practice. As you heard earlier, really feeling like there's a sense of a quick win and success for teachers really helps to build their confidence in applying continuous improvement research to address the immediate problems they're working on, but really across other levels of their work. Okay, so I'd like to take the time, and I'm going to invite my colleague, Dominique Bradley, to help me in fielding some of these questions, because I know that I might have missed some of them while I was presenting. So I'm happy to address any, Dominique, at this time.
Let's start with a specific question. How many teachers were involved in the NICs that you worked on?
So it really ranged in the math NIC, for example, we had 10 high schools with teachers in algebra and geometry, and I would say that that number was just over 100 teachers. In the literacy network, we are working with 10 middle schools, teachers 6th, 7th, and 8th, both in ELA, though the focus is literacy. It's both ELA and history. And in the student-centered formative assessment NIC, we actually worked with 3 different high schools across several districts. And I would say that by the 3rd year, we were working with approximately 80 teachers.
All right, excellent, thank you. Next question, which is a great question. How will you explain in more detail how the participants would know if something worked or not?
Good question. So when we come together as a team, depending on the change idea that we're testing, and just to give you a concrete example, I mentioned that a change idea was to monitor the depth of conversations, right? So the teachers would then decide on what that measure might be. So they might have a set of indicators that they're looking for when they're walking around and listening to student conversations. It can be as simple as counting the number of students that are participating and engaging in the conversations. And then there may be it could be a range from 1 to 3 as far as the depth of conversations, the types of questions that they're asking, the way that they're arguing with each other along a particular concept. That data is determined before the change idea is tested. Teachers gather that data, and then we look at trends. So they'll reflect individually and say, I noticed that this percentage of my students participated, yet the quality of the conversations were not quite where I wanted them to be based on this set of data. And the teachers share it, and then they look to see if there are any commonalities across their experiences, and where a teacher might not have done as well as another, they talk about why and what could possibly be something that the teacher does as an individual, but what could be more closely related to the change idea as a whole that might lead to further refinement.
Thank you. We have more questions coming in. Can you please further explain what it means to have a team of diverse set of expertise in terms of who should be involved with the NIC?
Yes. So, I really the way I like to think about it is who can bring a unique perspective or different angle to the problem at hand, and who could offer up a diverse set of potential ideas to how to resolve it. And when I say that, I mean researchers, for example, can be extremely helpful in helping you find evidence-based change ideas. Their perspective is unique. Practitioners often don't have the time to cull through the research to help determine what could be some possible solutions to your problem, and can help facilitate the process of looking at the problem. So it's good to have people that are very close to the problem, such as teachers that are in the classroom, but people that are also a little bit less sort of in the trenches is also helpful. And it really depends on the focus of your networked improvement community. If the content is math, you want to include math experts, but you might want to have someone on your data team that can support teachers in really ensuring that their measures that they're selecting are solid, and that they're going to give them the information that they need. So the more you can bring together a group of individuals with varying strengths and sets of expertise, the more solid your plan will be, and a better understanding you'll gain as to whether it's really leading you to get the outcomes that you're seeking for.
Okay, great. We've got more coming in. This is one we hear a lot. What's the difference between NICs and PLCs?
Really good question. And I think they share a lot of similarities. I would say probably the most distinguishing thing is that typically a PLC will have sort of a long-term focus on an immediate progression in achievement. So for example, they might say we want to increase proficiency in students. So let's look at data, either formative or summative assessment data. Let's look at a unit that's upcoming. Let's make sure that we understand where students are at. How do we shift instruction? So to me, it's sort of a broader and more long-term range way of thinking about improving student performance, and it's important. And oftentimes PLCs implement plan, do, study, act cycles when they're looking at a unit and maybe a formative assessment. What NICs really do is that imagine sort of a microscope that's really looking at something very, very specific in instruction that is contextualized to that individual's classroom. So again, taking the example I mentioned earlier, if we're looking at quality dialogue in solving, arguing, and evaluating, what specifically around instruction, not necessarily just content, but what instructional moves are we making? What are the structures involved in that? How are we tracking how those instructional moves are happening? So it's very much focused on the teacher moves in order to get the student behaviors that we're hoping to, that will then lead to, again, the impact the secondary primary drivers and then the aim. So it's a subtle difference, but it happens very quickly, and teachers change what they're doing almost immediately as far as how they're teaching, and part of it is content focused, but a lot of it is more so on shifting those instructional moves and sharing practices across not just their PLC team, but across other grade levels, across other content areas, and in some cases across districts, depending on the nature of the NIC. And I know that we're close to time, Dominique. And
we are at time, yeah.
And I just want to say that some of these questions we can address during the panel as well. We will have the opportunity to continue to answer some of these.
Yeah,